I wish we didn't have this reason to be together today, but it's really good to be with so many friends and colleagues who all want the same thing, which is for this war to end, for the hostages to come home, for the starvation and the killing in Gaza to stop. In just a couple of days on Saturday night, we're going to be reading the book of Eicha. And honestly, you could open up the book of Eicha and read almost any single line, and it would be so resonant with the moment today. For example, Kol ha'ma'aneh achim mevakshim lechem. All of her inhabitants sigh, all the inhabitants of the city are sighing as they search for bread. They've bartered their treasures for food to keep themselves alive. We hear reflections of babies who are in their mother's arms dying for lack of milk and other food. Unfortunately, these scenes from the destruction of Jerusalem sound very much like the streets of Gaza today. There's a midrash that I love, a rabbinic teaching that I love about the book of Eicha, in which God is depicted as crying. God is up above looking down at what's happening, and God is crying. And yet God doesn't really know how to mourn because God isn't human. And so God brings in the Malachei Asharet, the angels, and says, well, what does a human being do when they're mourning? And these angels basically describe how human beings mourn, the process of Shiva. And God says, okay, that's what I'm going to do. But what's so poignant about this midrash is that God isn't connected to human beings in this moment. God can't ask them. God is up by God's self, crying and relying on these angels for information about the human world. And meanwhile, human beings are down below also crying, but that relationship for the moment is broken. And so I really believe that as we're crying today, that God is up above also crying over the destruction, both and the deaths, both of Israelis and of Palestinians. And I hope that we can reconnect and make that connection again to cry together and to bring a change to the world. Because this is not just a political issue, this is a moral issue, what's happening right now. The good news is that more and more of us are crying out, that more and more of us are crying and yelling about the starvation and the death in Gaza, about the desperate need to bring the remaining hostages home, and about the desperate need to finally end this war that long ago ceased to be a war to protect Israelis and became a war of revenge and of settlement. There are some people who think that you can only cry for Israelis or Palestinians. We've unfortunately seen more and more of that over the last couple of years. There are some people who think that you have to only care about what happened on October 7th, about the atrocities then, or you only have to care about Palestinians. And something that Trua has done, and I know many of our partners on this call have done over the last couple of years, is to model that that is not correct, that actually our hearts are big enough to cry for everybody, that our hearts are big enough to cry for those who are murdered and kidnapped and raped on October 7th, and also to cry for the more than 60,000 Palestinians who have been killed, including more than 18,000 children. The Washington Post, I think just today or yesterday, listed their names and some of their photos, and it's just brutal. And that we can also cry for the nearly 900 soldiers, Israeli soldiers, who have been killed in the war since, and even more if you include those who have died by suicide. And so we're here today to call for the hostages to come home, to end the war, to condemn war crimes on both sides, both by Israel and by Hamas, and to call desperately for humanitarian aid, including a surge of food and of medical support for Gaza and for the rebuilding of Gaza soon, as almost the entire population is displaced and so much of the Gaza Strip has been destroyed. A week or so ago, I wrote an op-ed that I understand has been getting around a lot. And I wrote it, it's in the chat, but I wrote it because I saw that even though most Jews are horrified by the growing starvation in Gaza, many of our legacy organizations had not yet spoken out. And you can read the whole op-ed, but I just want to note that in it, I quoted a very prominent rabbi. I'll mention who he is and the context, But he says that the event, again, I'll mention the context, has caused, beyond the moral aspects which cry out to the depths of the heavens, a great Chilul Hashem, or desecration of God, and Israel and among the nations. And he goes on to accuse the government of Israel of prioritizing the honor of the prime minister over that of God. So the context, this rabbi is Rabbi Yehuda Amital, Zichrono Livracha, who was a prominent rabbi, the rabbi of the Har Etzion Yeshiva in the West Bank. And he was writing this just a few days after the massacres in Sabra and Shatila in 1982, and calling for there to be a commission of inquiry and calling for Israel to really come to account. And as I said in this op-ed, at the same time that he was saying this very prominent Orthodox rabbi, and that some 400,000 Israelis were marching in the street, that what American Jewish organizations were saying were things like, we reject the idea of any participation or involvement by the IDF in this terrible event, or condemning the trigger-quick eagerness of the world to blame, that's the end of the quote, to blame Israel for the incident, which doesn't sound unfamiliar based on some of what we've heard from our communal organizations. And so it's important for American Jews to say that those voices from those organizations, either then, nearly 50 years ago, or now, are not what speaks for American Jews. And in fact, the majority of American Jews, like the majority of Israelis, want this war to end, want the hostages to come home, want the starvation in Gaza to cease, and want to build toward a better future for Israelis and Palestinians. The last thing that I'll say is just on Monday night, perhaps some of you were there, we did a major rally with hundreds of Jewish community members outside of the Israeli consulate, including partnerships with G Street and many of the other organizations that are on this call. And we did this because we knew that American Jews really wanted to show up in this moment. And as part of that, we had a minion of rabbis who were arrested, including me, blocking the street leading to the consulate, putting our bodies on the line to say that we need to make this public statement that rabbis won't stand for what's happening in Gaza, that American Jews won't stand for what's happening in Gaza. So we were really part of a growing movement. There's another rally coming up on Monday in New York, and I know others being planned around the country saying this is not what American Jews want. I want to leave you just with a little bit of hope. This is also from Echa Rabbah, from the book of Midrashim that I started with, that this rabbinic tradition says that every single year while the Israelites were in the wilderness, every single year on Erev Tisha B'Av, they would all dig their own graves. Every single one of the people who had come out of Egypt, they would dig their own graves and they would sleep in that night. And when they would wake up in the morning, they would find out that of the 600,000 people who had originally left for Egypt, that 15,000 had died overnight. That's 1/40th if you don't want to do the math yourself. So every year, 1/40th of the people they found were dead. And in the 40th year, they woke up and they found that nobody was dead. And they said to themselves, we think that we got the night wrong because every single year, 1/40th of us have died this night. And so they went back and they slept in those graves, the 10th night, the 11th night, the 12th night, and so on. And finally, in the full moon, which was on the 15th of Av, also known as Tu B'Av, a Jewish love holiday, they said, well, I guess that God has annulled this decree that we're not going to die this year. And they went on to make that a holiday and to say this is when our mourning starts, this is when our mourning ends, mourning with a U. And so as we're going into Tisha B'Av, it's important to remember that this is a day of deep mourning, both for the atrocities that have happened to the Jewish people over the course of our history, and also it is a moment to think about the atrocities that are happening in Gaza or elsewhere in the world in this moment, but that's not the end of the story, that there is another story there is a moment that we will wake up and find that nobody has died, God willing, that night, a moment that we can move on to build. We know, of course, that the Mashiach is supposed to be born on Tisha B'Av, that redemption ultimately comes from the holiday that commemorates the worst things that have happened to the Jewish people. And so even as we're sitting in this pain and the suffering and calling for it to end, we know that we have, even here on this Zoom, combined with the rest of the American Jewish community and Israelis and Palestinians and everywhere around the world, we have the power to bring forth a better future.